We're going to move next to my colleague, Renee DiResta, who ordinarily occupies an office just down the hall from me on Stanford University's campus, but not today. Today, Renee is going to talk to us from somewhere else, where hopefully her connection is going to be stable. She is a researcher at the Stanford Internet Observatory, and she's going to talk to us about misinformation and disinformation with respect to COVID-19. Renee, you can join with your screen and slides now if you can.
Title slide, Propaganda and Pandemics, How Chinese State Media Shapes Narratives on Coronavirus. So I'm actually not talking about social media misinformation and disinformation in the user-generated mimetic context in this case. One of the projects that we've been working on, my colleague Vanessa Molter has done a bunch of excellent research over the last month. We've been observing Chinese white propaganda for quite some time. We began actually in a project related to the Taiwan election, and we started following along with what the official channels were saying, what the English language channels specifically were saying, to understand how state-sponsored narratives were shaping the conversation worldwide. So as just a really quick background, the propaganda spectrum, when we talk about this is not a new concept. States work to control information for reasons of everything from public diplomacy to malign influence. When we talk about the propaganda spectrum, we start on the white propaganda spectrum, which means it's overtly attributable. You know exactly what state is producing the content. In these cases, China is most often in the name. Other examples would be Russia Today. Then there's the kind of gray propaganda spectrum. That's where you get into the provenance, the claims, the funding sources are obscured a bit. And then black propaganda is the deliberate misattribution, the sort of internet research agency or troll farm activity that we actually talk about quite a bit. But for this particular chat, what I want to go into is actually the white propaganda ecosystem and how narratives are moving their way from Chinese social media through to Chinese narrative propaganda and then being pushed out both on Facebook and through strategic communications on Twitter and elsewhere by high-profile, attributable diplomats. So everything we're talking about here, there's no plausible deniability involved. This is a state-sponsored communication. So the interesting thing about China's white propaganda ecosystem is that it exists on Facebook, even though Facebook is banned in China. So what they've done is they've created a range of properties, and most of their properties are regionalized. So the ones that you're looking at on my screen right now are the ones that are in English specifically, but there are also Spanish language and Arabic language and a number of other regionalizations for most of these properties. But you can also see year-over-year growth. So this is 1 year's worth of data. And so you can see that these pages over in the page likes column are upwards of, many of them, most of them, upwards of 50 million likes. Just to put that in perspective, CNN has about 33 million likes. Fox News has, I think, around 14 or 15 million likes. So China is investing heavily in this English language broadcast ecosystem on Facebook. They're prioritizing the development of it, and they do have massive audiences, even though we believe the interaction rate, the engagement rate is not as high as you would see on other state media. So one of the ways that they've done the work of amassing this audience is they do run Facebook ads. And so we've observed over time, while most of the ads generally focus on positive news stories about China, beginning in January of this year, about a third to half of them began to focus almost exclusively on coronavirus. So China was paying to boost its state-sponsored propaganda stories on coronavirus in particular. So we started looking at why that was and what that was. And one of the things we believe is that perception of the pandemic has been a significant PR challenge. And this is because, of course, there is a sense that, the virus originated in China. And so that the Chinese response was a bit slow, that the Chinese response initially was to conceal, that the data emerging was not necessarily reliable. There was a news story that broke today claiming that the death numbers have been vastly underreported. And so there was a lot of need to manage perceptions, need to manage the way that the world saw their response to the outbreak. And also, as they got a handle on their regional outbreak, as it gradually became a pandemic, ways in which that narrative was then ported into broader narratives around how the Chinese government system was superior to Western democracies because it had allowed them to tamp down in extremely effective ways. So Chinese media began covering the coronavirus and very early, of course, in January 2020. This is where we began to see state-sponsored media, including coronavirus content in their posts. You can see there's a rather significant offset. The U.S. is about a month behind as we look at what, it was not a thing that most U.S. media was paying attention to quite the same extent. So a lot of the conversation that we're looking at began much earlier in China as the significance became much clearer in China first. We observed three primary narratives. There's content related to the origin, there's content related to the spread and treatment, and then there's content related to the government response. A fourth narrative has begun to emerge that's related to conspiratorial state communications, which I'll touch on very, very briefly because I've only got 7 minutes. But narrative one, the media spin was really focused on rapid recovery. So you see here two kind of conflicting stories about a baby diagnosed with coronavirus. So the CNN emphasis is on the diagnosis. The China Daily story is actually on the fact that here was this other baby that was born with no infection. So China is putting out very positive news stories in its official channels about cures, about rapid recovery, about the number of people who have been successfully treated, while US focuses much more on numbers of infections. The Li Wenling case, this was, of course, the doctor who was the whistleblower. There is no mention in the official communications or reports that are put out in the English language media ecosystem of the early warnings, the fact that he was arrested, the silencing attempts. What we see instead is we're mourning a national hero. So a lot of the content on that focus, the warning piece of it is largely left out of the narrative. Instead, we have the narrative of a hero doctor who was one of the first to uncover the virus and the early activity that the Chinese state government, the kind of persecution is possibly a bit strong, but the arrest and the silencing attempts were largely eliminated from the narrative. We see again, what are the words? We're examining words that they use.
1 minute.
And we're beginning to see again the narratives really focusing very much on him and his personal story, not China's reaction to it. China then begins to frame the response narrative as China has bought the world time. Their effective containment, their effective treatment has given the world time to prepare because the pandemic was not universal earlier, versus the US, which of course is focusing on the way in which China has in fact botched their response. These platforms are really being used as a tool in shaping the global narrative. There's quite a PR battle happening. This is where you begin to see the conspiratorial communications emerging. Conspiratorial communications began in their media ecosystem in early January, but really made national news in March. So it was about a 2-month kind of percolation through channels to get conspiratorial narratives saying that the outbreak didn't originate in China out there earlier. I'll just say that io.stanford.edu is where our blog posts and research are posted, and you can see much more in detail and methodology around the work that we've been doing on this.
Great, thanks very much, Renee. I'm going to repeat that web address for everyone. That's io for Internet Observatory.stanford.edu, where you can get more information about Renee DiResta's research as well as other scholars too.